together, 24 and 25 of Hebrews chapter 10, reading, let us hold fast, start again. And let us consider one another to provoke unto love and to good works, not forsaking the assembling of ourselves together, as the manner of some is, but exhort one another, and so much the more as ye see the day approaching. May God bless the reading of His Word. Now, the topic given to me tonight is to talk about how do we provoke each other. What are you provoking? What are you provoking? Now, if you look at verse 24, you will see, let us consider one another to provoke. To provoke. Now, here is an instruction given to us as Christians that we must consider each other and we must provoke one another. Why so? Why so? This is not something that the Christian can ignore. This life that will provoke each other. Now, what is this word provoke? What does it mean? Why does God want us to consider one another to provoke one another? Now, this word provoke means to stir up, all right? To stir up. It is to stimulate someone, excite someone, excite their senses, excite their desire, excite their actions towards something. So when God says provoke, now this word is also used to describe provoke people to anger, all right? In other words, it brings up very strong and sharp emotions as well as reaction. Right? So this word provoke is to cause someone to react. To react. Now, either to react positively or to react negatively. So provoke to anger, of course, negative. Of course, negative. So it is to incite. It's like people going out to protest, to incite, to stir up, all right? To stir up action. And this word provoke is to cause someone to sharpen, to focus his or her feelings or actions towards something. Towards something. So God says to provoke people. To provoke people. Of course, in this context here is to provoke to love and good works, to provoke to something good, to incite. To incite. Now, but what is important about this word is it is to cause a change in motivation and attitude and action of another person. I say again, to cause a change. The reason for provoking is to cause a change in motivation, in action, in attitude of a person. That is what it is. Now, the Christian must know that we either provoke someone to something better or something worse. God tells us to provoke others. Now, in our living, we have to realize this, and we cannot run away from this, that all of us are always provoking others. It's inevitable. You're always influencing someone. You're always causing someone to react to you or to something. So you can't avoid, in a sense of this word provoke, you can't avoid provoking others. Parents, you can't avoid provoking your children. You either provoke them to evil or to good. Friends in church, you will provoke each other. Wives to husband, husband to wives, spouses, you will provoke something in the other person. All right, whether it's family, whether it's church, whether it's friendships. Provoking someone, changing someone in their thinking, in their attitude is happening all the time. All the time. Do you agree? Because in every interaction, whether it's face-to-face, whether it's through media today, you're always casting some thoughts, you're always planting some seed, planting some thoughts into another person. Always, all the time, it's happening. The world constantly seeks to provoke you. The world constantly seeks to make you think of certain things. Why? Why does the world try to make you think of some things? Why do companies spend millions, if not billions of dollars on advertisement or marketing? Supermarkets, brochures. Why? Why does Google spend so much money trying to find out information? Because the world knows that if you can plant the right thought in you, it will bring certain reaction. That's why this word provoke is not simply to incite, simply to sow certain thoughts, but it is in particular to increase or sharpen your attention, your attitude, your desires, and then change your motivation, and finally get you to change your character, your behavior, your choices. All right? So when you look at this verse, God says, consider one another. Let us consider one another to provoke. To provoke. Provoking is going to happen. But the question is this. Now we know provoking is happening all the time. Now I'm speaking to you, I'm provoking certain thoughts in you. And my desire is that certain change will come over you. That's what we prayed, the chairman and I just now, that you will be transformed. Provoking you. But look at this verse, my friends. Let us, verse 24, and let us consider one another to provoke. Because provoking is happening all the time. Constantly. In your friendships in church, in your home, at work. So God says in verse 24, let us consider one another. Because provoking will happen and is constantly happening, so let us consider one another. In other words, you and I cannot live with random thoughts, thinking that no provoking is happening. I am not influencing anyone. I am not affecting anyone. I'm not affecting my wife, my children, by my choices, my attitude, by my words. I'm not affecting them. You cannot think like that. God says, consider one another. In other words, God is saying, now you must be very conscious. When you are interacting with friends in church, God says, consider one another. Why? Because either you're going to provoke them to good or provoke them to evil. That is why I say now, we consider one another to provoke unto love and good works. God wants us in this natural process of provoking to provoke positive things. But in order to do that, now realizing that provoking is happening all the time, God says then we have to be very deliberate and very careful. Alright? Since they brought it up, I should use it. Now, provoke. We know what that means. It is to incite, to stir up. Stir up. And it is to change. To change. You know change, right? Change. To change someone. God says, do this. And God wants us to promote for love. To love and good works. Love and good works. So the positive kind of provoking. But God says, because this is happening all the time, you need to consider. You need to be very careful, knowing that this thing is happening all the time, either to positive or to negative. It's happening all the time. You and I better be deliberate. Be conscious. Be very aware. Not just aware that it's happening, but with a consciousness to provoke to something that is good. something that is good. In other words, for example, parents. Now we always say this, sometimes when I visit families, it's very amazing. As adults we are talking, and then suddenly the child playing on the floor with his own toy or her own toy suddenly reacts to our conversation, either laughs or imitates. A child is constantly being provoked. Parents must be very conscious, aware and deliberate, because you're either provoking good or evil. Friendships are the same. You must be very aware of that. This topic for combined fellowship is to cause us to be aware as working adults, as families, to be very, very conscious of our interaction one with another. Because whether you like it or not, you are changing someone. You are affecting someone. Hence, God says in verse 24, let us consider. I don't know whether you remember, we did cover this passage at our last combine, I think. It was the same passage. Then we focus mainly on the assembling of ourselves. Today we want to focus on the provoking part. The provoking part. Now look at this word consider. Who remembers? Who remembers what is this word consider? The last time we covered at our last combined CAF and Regen combined fellowship. Anyone remember? Those who attended Chinese camp have no excuse, because I remember Brother Eugene explained a bit of this word consider. What's consider? Anyone remember? Okay, call this side. Alex.
Is it to bend over and examine?
Examine. Wow, very good. It's really like bending over and examining. It's like you're looking at the jewel and you're looking at it very intensely. All right, very intensely. So this is not a casual observation. God says that we will always affect someone. Therefore, we better have very deliberate consideration. In other words, examine very carefully. Examine others very carefully. Now this word, as I mentioned, is a careful thought. An awareness in order to know the other person's needs or what the person is going through. All right? It's not asking you, this week so-and-so wore pink. Then next week also wear pink. The person didn't wash the clothes. Now, observe those non-essentials. Now, here is a careful observation in order to know the other person's need, the other person's spiritual state, to know the trials that the other person is going through. Now, that is that examination. Because we know, or rather, if we do not know the spiritual state, for example, of the other person, then what you provoke can worsen the situation for the person, right? In fact, we even in normal friendships, we are quite careful, right? We are quite careful. Like, for example, if you know someone had a car accident, right? You observe, you know, when you meet the person, you're quite conscious and careful, right? You don't make fun of it. You had an accident. Oh, how come you're so careless? You're so stupid. You're conscious, you're careful, because you know what you're going to do next is going to affect the person. Affect the person. So God says the Christian must live in this constant, deliberate, careful thinking of the other person, and then to adjust our behaviors to stir up good in the person. You cannot live randomly. You cannot also think, I'm nobody. Some of us think, I'm nobody. No one notices me. No one really talks to me even. So it's fine. It's not true. Here God says, let us consider everyone. You may think that people are not noticing you. You may think that people don't talk to you. And people, therefore you have no impact on them. It's not true. It's not true. People do get affected, even by someone who seems to be very passive. In fact, maybe I'll ask you, actually, if being passive, how does it affect the other person? Kenny, how? How does being passive? Say again?
The other person would either learn being passive as well.
Yep.
Or the other way would be the opposite.
Right? So the other person can watch you, observe. Actually, this brother or sister comes to church, doesn't talk to anybody, just hides in the corner or just disappear. You're very passive. You may think that, look, I'm not influencing anybody, I'm not affecting anybody. But you are. You are. You are, by your passivity. Alright, so God says the Christian must be conscious of what you are putting out to provoke others. Because whether active or passive, you are going to change someone in church. So it's something that we cannot avoid, it's something that we must be conscious of. And now actually you look for context, verse 23. Let us read verse 23 together. Reading. Let us hold fast the profession of our faith without wavering, for he is faithful that promised. Then he said, and let us consider. Let us hold fast the profession of our faith. Now we cannot not hold forth, hold steadfastly, show forth, testify of our faith. Both faith of salvation as well as faith of what a Christian is in this world. So even you, in verse 22, even your behavior at work, what are you showing to your colleagues? What are you portraying to your classmates? No students here, maybe some. What are you showing forth? What are you holding fast and what are you holding forth in the profession of your faith to unbelievers? You also need to consider, because you are going to provoke certain thoughts in their minds about what Christianity is, who Christ is. So the Christian, now if I'm probably beating this to death, the Christian, before I move on, is the Christian must know the moment you wake up, you are a provoker. A provoker. You can't avoid that. That is why you and I must constantly consider. Parents must consider your child. Parents must, spouse must consider each other. Friends must consider each other. You before your colleague, you must consider them also. You must observe and know very clearly. So you're walking constantly is as a provoker, constantly as someone that is either going to change someone for the better or for the worse. I say again, please don't think that a good testimony is only for strong Christians and for full-time workers and for church leaders. This is simply addressed to all believers. This was not addressed to church leaders. It was addressed to the church, for the assembling of the church. Alright, so now this is something that we must accept, know, and therefore ask ourselves, then what? Then how? What am I supposed to do? So first of all, you must remember, provoking is inciting, stirring to change someone. In other words, you also must know you're observing for the purpose of changing someone. The Christian consideration, whether it's profession of faith to unbelievers or to family or to church friends, You are a provoker, given. Therefore, you must know not only that you will change someone, you will affect someone, but you must aim. You must aim. I say again, you must target. You observe with a purpose to change someone. Changing someone influence someone is given, it's going to happen. Either positively or negatively. It goes without saying. Influencing someone negatively, you don't need to think much. Agree? Don't need to think. We, by our flesh, have certain tendencies of certain sins. We don't have to think. We are more than happy to live it out. But we know we must rein it in, we must control ourselves. So, changing someone negatively, I don't think we need much thought. Very easy. You and I must focus on changing someone positively. Positively, after you see, to love and good works. And at the same time, control ourselves not to influence someone negatively, because it's so natural and easy for us to do, and it will change them negatively. So we understand, right? We unpack these verses in chapter 10, verse 24. We understand why God says must consider. We understand what is provoke. Now, and it's one another. The point is the one another ring in church, if there's such a thing. The Bible has many verses on one another, one another, one another. Our life is, as some say, is a one anothering life, all right? It's a one anothering life. It is always influencing, being influenced, or consciously needing to do something for one another. The Christian life is not one of an isolated, live on my own. As long as I don't influence anyone negatively, I'm fine. No, the Bible has a lot of one anothering verses. The Christian life is about one anothering. You can't say, I'm not influencing any negatively, that's fine. No, we are called, we are expected to consider for one anothering. Positively, of course. So if you look at verse 24, let us consider, we know what it means. Alright? A very careful observation, awareness of the other person's needs. And I must do it because I am expected to. I'm expected to for the other person. I am expected to provoke another person. Then we look, to provoke to what? To provoke to what? To love and to good works. Two things, positive things. Love is good. Good works is good. So, we must now, from today onwards, be aware of this verse and not just ignore it. If you have not been consciously, deliberately observing your brethren and consciously controlling yourself and how you behave to stir them, to change them positively, then you must know, I must make that change today. I no longer, as a parent, as a friend, live randomly. I have to. Now the question is to provoke them towards what? Towards love and good works. What do they mean? What do you think they mean? Alright, so we come to church, or you're at home with your family, or you're at work with your friends. I'm observing and wanting to provoke others to love and good works. What do you think is love? Terry. Provoke Lydia to love. To love you. Take care of you, cook for you. Alright, very good. Now every time we see love, we think Well, since it's one anothering, it must be to love one another. Now, it's definitely there. All right? It's definitely to love. Brotherly love is there. All right? In fact, this is agape love. It's higher. It's the highest form. So the Christian must provoke one another to brotherly love. That's for sure. But the very important point, like we learned, whatsoever things are lovely. Whenever we think of love in the Bible, it must always, first and foremost, refer us to loving God. Even the two great commandments. The great commandment first is love God. And the same, love man. Alright? In the same vein. It's first and foremost motivated, driven by love to God. Alright? Provoke one another. Don't jump straight to love one another. Jump straight to first, to love God. Now, why do you think it's important? Now, most people will just go through this verse, alright, we must provoke one another. Since it's about good works help each other. Then love, since it's about one anothering, must we love one another. Why is it important that we understand that it is love towards God, first and foremost? Why do you think so? Why do you think so? Sujin or Xuning, why do you think so? Because first and great commandment. Yes, besides just needing to, this is the first and great commandment, so we must obey. But what's the problem if we jump straight to love one another? What do you think would be the problem? Valerie?
Because it will not last.
Say again?
It will not last.
It will not last, that's true, but
It's gratefulness towards what God has done for us, hence the gratitude and the love. That's the result come out.
alright, so it's gratefulness to God, and therefore we should respond first to God, to love God, to remember His love, and therefore to love Him. Okay, but the question is, why not just talk about love one another? Alright, observe, be careful, provoke, stir us to love each other. Why not? Why would it be not a good thing to jump to that straight away? Howard, why do you think so? We need to love in truth. Well, yes. So, first of all, our love must be love in God, right? So, if it is a false kind of love, what do you mean love in truth?
We love one another, but the truth is not.
If we love one another, but not in the truth, not in love towards God, right? Loving truth is loving God. Please understand that. Be very clear in your heart. You can't say you love God, but you don't love His truth. You love God, but you don't love His word. You love God, but you're fine if people attack His truth. There's no such love. Alright? So, first and foremost, our love towards each other. Before you even talk about that, we need to settle provoking people to love God. Because if you simply provoke love towards one another, what kind of fellowship will you end up in? What do you think? Grace? Just love one another. Without talking about love towards God. Become very social. That's all. What's an example? What is an example? I want you to think about this, because I think in all churches, yes, some pockets will not have much love for the brethren, but some pockets may have a lot of love. But if it is not first emphasized love towards God, what happens in those kind of groups, that kind of fellowships? What do you think happens in those kind of groups? Oh, Yanwei, I see you. It will not grow. It will not grow in God's word. Only fellowship. Like example what? Okay, maybe I bring closer family at home. You and Yifei, all right? Now, if you don't focus on, first and foremost, provoking Yifei to love God, but is just mainly stirring Yifei to love one another, you and him, you and her, and you and the family, what kind of activities will you have mainly? Just play, just eat. Now, play and eat, is it bad? Play and eat is not bad. But the question is, what you play? Well, I'm sure you won't eat something that's evil, not drugs. Play, eat, or go certain places. Go out together. You can play things that are ungodly, right? But you have great fun together. Am I right? Very fun, right? So if you focus on provoke one to love one another, people come to your house, wow, this house is so loving. They're always joking with each other. They don't quarrel. They're always doing things together, going out together, always so close. The question is, if it is not love towards God as an emphasis, then where they go, what they do all the time. They're watching bad movies together all the time. They're listening to bad music together all the time. They're only thinking about going out to eat. They're only thinking about holidays that have nothing to do when they're traveling, nothing to do with ensuring that they still worship the Lord, they still do their family devotion, nothing. It is just one anothering, that's all. That is why it is a great flaw for people to jump in this passage and simply focus on loving one another. That love will not be based on a love towards God first and foremost. But when you provoke your child, your spouse, your friends in church, first and foremost to love God, then everything else that you do, you suddenly become very, very aware and conscious. Because it's not just about provoking to love one another. That's all. Right? So the first and foremost is the provoking to love God. You must observe friends in church, whether you're close friends or not so close friends, especially close friends. Because why especially close friends that you need to be the most conscious? Why? Why do you think so? Hannah, why do you think so? You spend the most time together, number one. So the extent of your provoking is very, very great. Why else? Why else with friends you must be especially careful? Sujin.
Maybe because the love towards one another will eventually be more important than love towards God.
Right? Because you're very close. So closeness to one another is more important than God. That's a good example. Now, when you're very close to one another, you have to be especially conscious. What do you think of friendships? What do you think of friendships? Because I know of some Christians, they say, oh, yeah, I know that person is very carnal. Or I know the person is in a charismatic church or is ecumenical, or attacks the Bible. But I like the person's company. I like the person's company. Because it's just about one another. Provoke one another to love one another. Alright? And say, oh, but don't worry. When we are together, we don't talk about the Bible, we don't talk about God, we don't talk about Christian things. It's just one another. Support one another. What do you think of such a friendship? Xing Yun? Is it meaningful? Why not? God is not involved. All right, it's fine. It's provoke one another to love one another. Why must God be involved? Because we do not remember. Provoke one another to love is first provoke the person to love God. Influence the person to love God. And sometimes when you're close friends, you don't like to talk about these things. You agree? It's like that. In fact, sometimes the worst is family. Right? Who feels uncomfortable talking about spiritual things and loving God in the family? Some are like that. They say, this sounds very sensitive topic, embarrassing. You know I love God, you know you must love God, you know good enough, right? Good enough. They don't talk about it. We must consciously incite, even if you're very close friends, close relatives. We must. God says you are going to influence one another whether you like it or not. You better be influencing consciously something positive in the person. Now the third reason why close friends is very difficult is why else? Simply because you're close friends. You do not like friction, right? You do not like friction. So as long as the one anothering with close friends are fine, that is fine. Let's not talk about all these things. Once you say I must help the person to love God, if the person is in a false doctrine, if the person has wrong ideas about the Bible or God, you incite them to love God. In other words, what's the definition of love God? Ellen, what's the definition of love God? I love God. What's the best definition? What does it mean? Set my affection. Okay, I set my affection on Him. And maybe I ask this way. What's the greatest proof of love to God? Ben? Yeah. Huh? Yes, that's what you want to say, right? Ellen. The test is always, if any man love me, he will keep my commandments. Christ said it 3 times. And the 4th time He said it the other way. The person who doesn't love me doesn't keep my commandments. Simple as that. So, incite a person to obey God is inciting a person to love God. I want to say that again. Provoking one another to love, provoking the other person to love God is very simple. It's not buying gifts for the person and that kind of thing. It's helping the person to understand God's commandments and then obey it. That is what it means to incite someone else to love God. So first and foremost, it must start there. Maybe I'll ask you, what are some of the ways you can incite someone to love God or to not love God? Maybe to love God. Rowena. Share what you learn about God's Word. Alright? Share what you learn about God's Word. That's a good start. But how do you know what to share? Yes, yeah.
I guess from the messages you hear.
From the messages you hear. Alright? So, but in order to know in what areas does the person not love God, what must you do? Ask them about their life, right? Consider. Ask them about their lives. Observe their life. Know what they're going through. Because you can share a passage, share what you learn, but he has no bearing on the person. Then it doesn't stir the person to love God, right? Someone who's going through a very difficult time. How do you stir the person to love God? Actually, how do you think is the best way to stir a person to love God in this sharing part? How do you think? What's the most effective way? What do you think is the most effective way? Chen Hui, what's the most effective way? Say again? Pray for the person. Okay, yes, pray for the person. That's a place to start. But after praying, what's the best way? What's the most influential way? Nancy, what's the most influential way? Share your personal experience. Based on God's word, of course, right? Based on God's word. Why does sharing your personal experience help? Why? Maybe why? Why does it help the person to love? God. You know that someone else have gone through something that you are going through. It's very difficult. But you know when the person shares from God's word how God is faithful, how God helped. And to submit to God's will is the best thing. But the person went through that. You stir the person to say, yes, I will also submit to God. Now, in other words, it is not random, all right? You look at verse 25. So now I ask the question. Now, how does God want us to provoke to love and good works? All right, we come to good works soon. But how? You look at verse 25. Not forsaking the assembling of ourselves, as the manner of some is, but exhorting one another. Exhorting. So two things. How? Number one, assembling, not forsaking the assembling of ourselves together. Some do that. Some forsake. Two, but do the opposite instead. Exhort one another. Exhort one another. Alright, so this is how God says you are going to provoke. This is how you're going to provoke one another. Now, what does good works mean? And what does love mean? What does good works mean? What does not forsaking the assembling mean? What does exhorting mean? What does all these things mean? God says we must be very deliberate, very conscious, very focused on doing these things to change someone. So what are all these things? Now, in order to progress systematically, let's look at verse 24 first. Now, to provoke unto love, so we know that. To love and to good works. Now what about the love one another? Now, the exhorting and the coming together, exhorting is really some of the things you shared. We go into more of it afterwards. What you can do positively and what you can actually do negatively. But now let's just stay on verse 24. What is love? What is good works? So some of the things that you shared is really exhorting. Some of you shared exhorting. That is what it means. But let's come back to here first. Now, what about love one another? So love towards God first and foremost. Very important. You know the pitfall if it is not. You know the pitfall if it is not. You just have friendships that are just very fun. Do things that you like. But it provokes the opposite. It stirs the opposite things in the other person. Right? We can talk about examples. Now, what about loving one another? What is it about? What do you think it is about? Cheryl. Provoke one another means you observe the other person, provoke them to love God. And what about provoke them to love one another? What's an example? Provoke the other person to love one another. Help them when they are in need. Yes, that's a very good, straightforward one. Right? Help them. Show your love to them when they're in need. Help them. So the Christian can't just live a life that is that doesn't deliberately try to help others. Now, this help includes both spiritual and physical. Some people need actual physical help. That is where we do it. Some people need spiritual encouragement, strengthening to love God. We do that. Now, the other one is provoke them to love one another is, now if you are a person that is very passive, very introverted, and you keep to yourself, you can't say that you provoke people to love one another. You can't say that. Because you are just simply showing the example that there is no need to stir another person to show physical, active, not passive, interest in others and help others. You can't. So God wants us to do that, and He expects us to do that. Now, but very quickly, what about good works? All right, so stir people to love the Lord, stir people to interact, stir people to be concerned with one another's spiritual needs. Now, what about the others? Good works. What do you think are good works? Now, good works, actually, let me ask you, what are good works? Think about it. Phyllis, what are good works? Stir them to good works. Go build schools. Very good. Good works, by definition in the Bible, here, well, obviously it's not good works to be saved. All right, the passage is about saved believers. Now, it's about godly works. Godly works. Good works that bring glory to the name of God. Good works are holy works that is the child's obedience to the Lord. That is what it means by good works. All right, so the Christian must stir others to godly walk. That is what it is. You are either provoking people to an ungodly walk or a godly walk. No two ways about it. God says, be conscious to observe this sister, this brother is already worldly and carnal, is already disobeying God in certain things. I need to be very conscious when I am with the person to not stir the person who is already not spiritual to do and to love and to continue in carnal things, worldly things, but I must be very conscious, especially now when I talk to the person, when I interact with the person, I want to stir him or her to godliness, to change this person, whether it's your child, whether it's your spouse. Now, if you know your spouse has certain weaknesses, tendencies to certain sins, you need to be especially conscious, not stir it the opposite way. What do you do with your friends? So let me ask you actually, how can you stir the person in the opposite way? How? What do you think? How you can end up stirring the person in a opposite way? Okay, those far behind. Claude, how can you stir the person? Stir towards the opposite thing. Negative thing.
Keep quiet.
Say again?
Keep quiet.
You keep quiet. Means the person is doing certain sinful things and you just keep quiet about it, you don't do anything about it. Is that what you mean? Yeah, then you let the person keep doing. Why do you think so? Now, sometimes our silence. Okay, so for example, this person is doing something or playing something or continuing in something sinful. Alright? So if Claude knows and Claude is with the person and the person wants to do it, the person takes it out and starts doing it, or takes out this bad computer game or watch this movie, ungodly movie and all that. Then Claude keeps quiet. What do you think the Christian is thinking? What do you think? Don't know. Keziah. What would the persons be thinking?
You can either think that what you say at the moment doesn't actually understand, I think that
But what happens? So the person can keep quiet because he don't know what to say or he dare not say. But what will the other person who is now wanting or doing something that is sinful, ungodly, what will he think if you keep quiet? You kept quiet.
they will not know, they will not understand or know.
They will not understand. They may not know that it's sin. They may think it's fine, right? They may think it's fine. Now I know of someone whose family member is a Christian, and that person was drinking, and then this person said, "No, you should stop. The Bible is clear about total abstinence. Continue." And then it became a big argument between brother and sister. But if the person kept quiet, doesn't explain, then to the other person in the family, it's fine because this person is a Christian in my family, the person keeps quiet, so goes on, right? Someone is watching certain things. Now, what is the worst thing you can do when the person is watching or doing something sinful? What's the worst thing you can do? You're still there. What's the worst thing you can do? Some people behind. Okay, Huang Ti, what's the worst thing a Christian can do? So the person not only keep quiet. What's worse than keeping quiet? Say again? Can't hear. Do it together. Yeah, I think that's a good example. You join the person. Now, if you keep quiet, the person may think that you're not happy. But once you join, you take out the cup and drink. Or you continue playing cards or watching an ungodly movie. Or going somewhere that you shouldn't, doing something you shouldn't. The worst thing is you now really openly, by your own action and participation, provoke the person to ungodly works. Right? So that is why God says we must be very conscious. Very, very conscious, especially parents. You have to deal with things. You can't keep quiet. And the worst thing is your own lives is ungodly. It's the worst. So in other words, the worst thing is really to participate with them. That is the worst. Be very deliberate and consciously say, Lord, I am supposed to influence them to love you, that is to obey you, and stir them to change positively. And therefore, I cannot. Now, what is the easiest thing? Maybe I ask you, actually, why do Christians join in? Why do you think so? Why do Christians join in? Is it? That's how to differentiate. One is 一节, one is 一节. That's what I said. Okay, don't know. Alright, skip. Jason, why do you think a Christian participates? Don't know. You don't participate in it? Don't know. Why do you think so? Leah, why do you think someone participates? They don't want to be singled out. They don't want to be a party pooper. You know party pooper? Spoil the party. Yes, they don't want to be the odd one out. What else? Yeah, especially children. What else? What else can you think of? Why? I think sometimes we ourselves do not love God. Right? We ourselves are having ungodly desires. Right? So the love and the good works are both not in us. In fact, we are very happy when we consider, right? We consider, whoa, that group of Christians in church also love what I love. The bad things are not the good things. Right? After we consider, we say, all right, this is the group for me to join. And I'm very comfortable there. No one points out my sin. I don't point out your sin. You don't point out my sin. So let's sin together. Sometimes it's like that. So I think this passage, I hope, it reminds us. Jokes aside. Actually, I won't say jokes aside. All right. We have to crucify the flesh and say, I am my brother's keeper. You know brother's keeper? All right? I don't have a choice. I am. I'm supposed to. God says, consider. Look at verse 24. My duty is to consider one another, and my duty is consider them to provoke unto love and good works. I cannot not do this. I'm expected to do this even if I like what they like. I want to do what they like to do. I myself do not want to obey. I must know that God says I'm not supposed to live like that. I am my brother's keeper. Now what happens if you also like these ungodly things? What should you do? What do you think you should do? Who else have I asked? Angeline, what to do? If you like certain things and the other sisters also like, and it's not a good work, neither does it reflect love towards God. You stop it, but you can't stop. You have to stop it. Now, that's a good point. You have to stop it. Right? You have to stop it. You have to stop it. Now, and if you say, look, I am not ready to stop. I'm not willing to stop. Well, God will chastise you one day. Until then, what should you do? Please do not find others to keep you company. Do you understand what I'm saying? Because there's a subconsciousness in us. There's a subconsciousness in us that I like this, I'm not willing to stop. If others also like and they jump on board with me, then things seems to be okay, right? Then things seems to be okay. Please don't do that. Please don't do that. Now, why don't do that? Why don't do that? Okay, I can't ask people in the cry room. Okay, why don't they do that? Kong Wei, why don't do that? Why you better not do that? And they come along, Kong Wei, I also like to watch this Korean movie that you like. I'm not saying Kong Wei watches, I don't know. Right? What would you say? You make them continue, but what would you say? Okay, after service, you come to my house, all right? Or never mind, we watch in the car together. Would you say that? No. But in your heart, you know you're still doing it. Then how? I'm not promoting you to continue, huh? Promoting to stop. Don't do it with others, seriously. But why is it so? Because pastor says so. Right? Why? Is there a verse in the Bible that warns us? Don't take this lightly. God tells you to consider and promote and provoke to positive things. If you don't consider and you're not deliberate and careful and you actually get them on board, does God have a warning for you? Does He? Who haven't I asked? Benedict, does God have a warning for us when we're like that? Do opposite to what He says in Hebrews 10:24. Is there a warning? Something about stumbling people. Alright, turn to Matthew 18 verse 6. Matthew 18 verse 6. Now don't do the opposite to Hebrews 10:24. Matthew 18:6. Matthew 18 verse 6. Shall we read Matthew 18 verse 6 and 7? Let's read together. But whoso shall offend one of these little ones which believe in me, it were better for him that a millstone were hanged about his neck, and that he were drowned in the depth of the sea. Woe unto the world because of offenses, for it must needs be that offenses come, but woe to that man by whom the offense come. Now this word in verse 6, offend, is The Greek word is, I think, where we get the English word scandalize. Scandalize. You know scandal? Scandalize. If anyone scandalize, cause one of these little ones who believe in me to fall into scandal, means to sin. Or to stumble this person, cause this person to fall into a scandal, fall into a sin. Now God is very clear. Christ spoke from His own lips. Now all the Word of God is His words, the Word of God. But out of His own lips on earth He said, whoso, there is no exception, shall offend, cause one of these little ones which believe in me to stumble. It were better. Now, you would normally say it's better for him not to be born. That's already quite bad. But can you imagine from the lips of Christ something that is very, very, very strong? Better for him that a millstone were hanged about his neck and drowned, not just drowned, drowned in the depth of the sea. This sounds like a very, very terrible thing, right? You know, some people say, oh, this person is very good at cursing people. And they think of all sorts of ways to curse people. You think, wow, even Christ talks so strongly. It is very strong. It is very serious. Christ used very, very serious example. And I've said many times, this word millstone. Christ did not choose to say just the grinding stone. All right? There are another stone which the donkey pushes. The big one that needs the donkey to push. Because it's the big one. There's the smaller one, then there's the bigger one. All right? The bigger one will crush. So they need the donkey to push. In other words, take the bigger one. Don't go take the smaller one, put it on the floor, and then few of you take the big one and then tie it around this person's neck, because this person has provoked my child to fall into negative things. Better for this person, tie around his neck, then drop him, tie him to a corner, drop him into the sea, and make sure it's the deepest part of the sea. And you know what it means? And such that his body will never be found again. Leave his body at the bottom. You know how serious a statement like that is? What is the seriousness of this sin? We don't consider. We're not deliberate, we're not careful. And we provoke people to sin. You keep hearing, you read, you know what you shouldn't do. You like it. Don't fool around, don't play the fool with God. And you encourage others to also sin with you. You want to sin, you sin yourself. God will deal with you anyway. You want to sin and cause someone else to follow your sin, provoke them, stir them to like, God says, there's another warning. All right, so these are very serious warning. God says, when we come to church, parents, at home, you watch, you provoke to positive things. God encourages us to do that, stir us to do that. Be conscious of that. And at the same time, be very, very conscious not to do the opposite. Now, what else? All right, so I think that is what I want to warn us. But at the same time, now this passage, let's turn back to Hebrews, all right? Let's turn back to Hebrews. Turn back to Hebrews. Now the question is, how? All right, Lord, I don't want to. Now I know, as a Christian, I am not a person in a corner. No one noticed me. I'm fine. I am supposed to be someone that stir others to live, to love you, to love one another, and to be godly, to do godly works. All right, to do godly works. Yes, Lord, I want to do that. But Lord, can you teach me how? God gives the answer. Verse 25. How? So how? How? What? How? What are the things to do? Well, we already said, God said consider. After considering, and you know you must provoke your brethren, your family to do good, to love God, what is the next step?
Join the fellowship and encouragement.
Very, very good. Join the fellowship and encourage one another, because that is what God tells us in verse 25. Number one, not forsaking the assembling of yourselves. The first thing, in other words, join the fellowship. Number 2, encourage one another. That's the word exhorting one another. These 2 things, do. These 2 things, do. Today onwards, these 2 things, do. But the question is, what do they mean? What are they? What are they? Not forsaking the assembling of ourselves. I also explained this the last time. I don't know how many will remember. Now, not forsaking means don't put this, or the word forsake. Forsake means leave behind. Neglect, ignore. That is what it means. Leave behind, neglect it, ignore it. That is what it means. Alright? So God says, don't leave behind. Don't ignore. Don't forget assembling of yourselves. It's something that is important. Now, sometimes we forget and we think that coming to church is something that is I must do because church says so, because my husband wants me to, my parents want me to, I need to, and that's it. And now here God says, there are some, verse 25, as manner of some is. There are Christians already that have this attitude to ignore fellowships, to think that fellowships are not important. Now this is not just about worship, alright? This is more than that. Because this involves the exhorting and so on, the fellowship, the encouraging of one another. Now, the Christian must not have a life that is apart from the church, because it is not good for you. Because there is where you are going to get the provoking. And that is where we are expected to do the provoking. We have to. You have to. Now, in fact, this word assembling, anyone remember what this word is? In Greek, I explained before, but I think it's difficult. It's made up of 2 words. It's really like with or together, synagogue. We get the word synagogue from it. Synagogue is the place of worship. Alright, so don't forget, don't ignore, don't put aside the synagoguing together, the churching together. Coming to church, encouraging you to come to church, is not something that the church does because it wants your presence. It's simply telling you, I am just relaying the message to you parents, to you singles, to you family, to you ordinary workers. The churching together is something that God says, do it. It is part of the requirement of provoking. So you do not get provoked, neither will you provoke. You do not get stirred, neither will you stir if you don't church together. That is what it means. Do you agree? The more time your child spends with the unbelievers, the more it's going to be like the unbelievers. It's not going to be stirred to be godly. Right? God simply gives a very simple encouragement and solution, the churching together. There is the concept today that church is simply come to church on Sunday, I've done my dues, and I live my own life. This is very contrary to the New Testament church, what it used to be, what is normal. This life that we live today is very abnormal. If you're not part of a church life, it's abnormal, abnormal. All right? I've mentioned this before. Until Spurgeon, C.H. Spurgeon's time, people coming together to study the Word, to pray, continue steadfastly in the apostles' doctrine and fellowship is a very normal thing until his time, where there were ministers, there were Christians that began to question, why must we spend so much time in church? Why must we spend time with Christians all the time? We want to go to the movies. We want to spend Sunday bowling, lawn bowling. We want to spend Sundays going to watch a play. What is wrong with that? It's not sinful. It's sports and recreation. We want to have more family holiday time, go out, go eat, go watch all these things at night with our children, with my wife. Why must we come for prayer meeting? We have prayer meeting once a week now, right? Their prayer meeting used to be every night. And they come. Some few times a night. Few times a week, not every night. Depends on the church. So that was a very normal night. Because, why? Because the church says, no, because God says, consider one another and church together. That is the only way that your life is going to change, is going to be provoked. You skip to your detriment. That is what it's going to be. Alright, so that is one of the things. That is what the assembling together means. Not forsaking means please don't ignore it. Don't say it is not important. That is this word, ignore. Just ignore it. It's not important. Now whether you come after this or not is between you and God. I want to highlight one thing. Please know that when God says provoke one another, does God say provoke one another to good works and to love? No. The sequence is to love first. Provoke one another to love. Be stirred first to love God. Coming or don't coming is between you and God. Your love to want to grow and to obey Him and to know how to live for Him, how to lead your family towards Him, is all between you and God. We can only encourage you. But if you think that no, that is not important, neither is churching together important, it begins with this problem. That's why Paul tell the Christian, stir each other to love God first. Don't talk about godly walk, good works yet. Stir to love, because once we are stirred to love, once you stir one another to love, you will come. You will love to be with Christians. Now the difficult question is this. Alright? Is it about just coming? Please, it is not just come and hide in a corner. It's not just come and hide in the cry room. It's not just come and hide in one of the hall up there. It's not just come and be with your own family. And just gather with your own family. That is not what God is saying. You cannot provoke in the church in that way. God says it's a much bigger scale. Right, so it's not just about turning up, that's all. It's no use. Because you just come up to show face and to disappear. After that, we've come. Stir to love God. That is what is important. Good works will follow. Alright, so I just want to help us understand what this stir is. Now, give examples of how I can... Wait, next one. What about this word? What about this word? The next one is exhort. What is exhort? We studied also this word exhort means, yes, one of it is to encourage. Encourage. Comfort. Encourage and comfort. So he has that picture of encourage and comfort. Now in fact it's made of the word come alongside and speak to. Alright, this word exhort is really come alongside and speak to and instruct. So he has a picture of actively going towards a person or actively being with a person, and to encourage, to comfort, but for the purpose of strengthening. For the purpose of strengthening, and sometimes it may involve admonition, means correcting, teaching. So God says the way to stir one another to positive things, we spoke about the negative, is actually to do that. You have to spend time with Christians. You have to actively encourage someone, know their weakness, and encourage them how to grow spiritually. Not encourage them to continue in their sin by doing those things with them. Now, so please observe this word. The coming together, assembling of yourselves, is actively being with God's people. God says that is how you achieve provoking. And then exhortation is encourage one another, show scriptures, encourage, stir each other, strengthen each other spiritually. So one of the things that we do is speech. So if you were to ask, how do I strengthen another? You must be present. You must know. You must speak. Speech. There is the speech. Your speech either helps someone to be more godly or more ungodly. Watch what you speak. Be very conscious, deliberate. Observe your working person. You're a working person. Now observe something the other day which troubled me, which I want to speak with the person. You need to observe. You need to observe. Alright, these are students that I'm speaking with. I'm observing. Or this person is an elderly. I'm speaking to an elderly. I'm observing. This is a kid. This is a child. I'm observing. I'm conscious. I'm deliberate of what I say that will change this child or this elderly or this student. Speech is very careful. But this working person, I've been noticing, all this working person does whenever this working person meets a student is to keep talking about work. My workplace, my boss, my this, I do that, then my boss. It's constantly about that. And then I notice that more and more students like to gather around this person to drooling, just so enthralled with this is my achievement in life. This is what my boss thinks of me. This is how important. And keep talking about that. And I was thinking, the person is not observing. These are students. What are you building in this person? And then I heard the person say, Saturday I'm not coming for busy bee because, Saturdays are very busy. Got a lot of housework to do, Got this, got that. So I can't come. So busy. These are students. We have to know. In other words, we have to from now almost be very conscious. Because our natural flesh, our natural tendency is to talk about these things, whether to show off or whatever, or unconscious, because that's what we do. That's all we think about. Same at home, your child will begin to think, oh, that is the most important thing in life. Constantly talk about that. Our speech, God said exhortation is coming alongside and speaking. That's literally what it means. Therefore, we need to watch it. What we say to little children, very important as well. Alright? So suddenly consciousness of a Christian walk has to be very deliberate. Because we cannot avoid influencing someone. We will influence. Whether negatively or positively. We will change. Aim to change someone positively. Very important. Alright? Now, is it wrong to do housework? But one whole year, only 2 busy bee. That weekend, if you do your housework a bit earlier, or you don't wash clothes for one weekend, you won't go naked to work, right? It's not the end of the world. But now, what have we just planted in the students? Yes, this is how life is going to be when I grow up. When I work is going to be so busy that in the weekend I must do all my housework and forget church. Forget serving. Alright? Now, what else? How else can we influence? Now, this coming alongside, how else can you influence? Besides our speech, our actions, our choices. Very important. Our actions and our choices. What we portray. I want to say this, and I've said this many times. What we portray to our colleagues at work. What we portray to people in church, whatever age group. At home, to your family, to your spouse. What we say and what we choose we are portraying something. We are provoking something in others. You cannot not be conscious of that. What you promote. Let me ask you, how do people promote things nowadays? What's the most effective means of promoting something? What is it? Ben, Kan. Social media. Social media. Instagram, Facebook. What other social media? Don't know. All right, that's all. That's the main ones I know. In fact, I don't even use Instagram. Facebook, social media. What we post is what we are promoting. This is what I like, what I am, what I want the world to see. Social media. I've seen Christians post all the shoes she buy on Facebook, and make sure strategically behind the boxes and the brand of the boxes. Right? We are not conscious what we are portraying. What we are portraying, worldliness, carnality. I'm not saying we cannot own good quality things, but some people they can't afford, but that's what they want to show off. I've said many times since I came to this church, I do not like to talk about your job because I'm not interested. Because I believe, and I've seen in churches where people are very interested. And now I'm not saying you can't say, oh, so what do you do? But when it's a constant obsession with what job, with what car, with what house, with what holidays, it becomes a church that will be obsessed. What we portray by our choices, our actions, are very important. So we must be conscious. We must be aware. You see, Christians have come to a stage where we don't care. This is one of the things that I hope you remember about this message. We come to a stage where we really don't care. I don't care. I don't care about observing, being conscious, being deliberate, being careful, to influence, to stir, or to something positive. I really don't care. I'm not my brother's keeper. What I like, I like. You know, mind their own business. If they fall into this, it's not my fault. That's the attitude today. I don't care. I don't care. I'm just going to do this. Oh, you want to join me? Come and join me. I don't care whether I am influencing my spouse, my children, my friends in church to something that does not promote the love of God, love towards God and godly works. I don't care. I just live and do what I like to do. I like people to think that I'm rich, I am wealthy, I am fashionable, I am modern, I am whatever. I am that. I like people to know. I don't care. But when you read scriptures, it's very opposite. Look at Hebrews chapter 10. Let us hold fast, verse 20, let us hold fast the profession of your faith. The profession of our faith. Love to God and godliness. That is a profession of our faith to unbelievers at work, to friends in church, to our family. And let us consider, I cannot not be conscious of another. I must know that I am always influencing and I'm always changing someone. I must care. I must care. I must be putting effort from today onwards to care. How to care? I come to church. I exhort by my life, by my choices, by my speech. Now, there's another thing that I don't care that I'm addressing is by my attitude. There are a few things that we can do in the assembling, when we are assembled, is our speech, our actions, our choices, and our attitude. Saka. Our attitude. We must be saka, you know. means busybodies. When it comes to Christian, we must be busybodies. Not busybodies as into gossip, right? We must be busybodies. We must be concerned. Our attitude, that is the I don't care attitude, our attitude. Now, if you really don't care, and you just want to live as you wish, and continue in your errors, and you don't care that others learn, you know what God says? Look at the next one, verse 26. Let's read verse 26 together. For if we sin willfully, after that we have received the knowledge of the truth, there remaineth no more sacrifice for sins. There's a warning. Paul warned the people there. In their mind, what salvation is, they made up their mind. They made up their mind already. Paul explained the gospel. And then Paul says, now if you, having known the truth, and you still sin willfully after you receive the truth, there's no more sacrifice. Means, Christians, you better check your salvation. If you really don't care, week after week you hear and you don't care, your attitude don't change. Like these people, Paul warned, I keep telling you what is the true gospel. True gospel and true salvation, there will be love and good works, and stir each other to that. But if you don't believe in the true gospel, there's no more sacrifice for you. You know, there were Christians who knew, but they willfully disregard, because these were never saved. I've come to one conclusion after the progressive Christianity, where how do you explain pastors, senior pastors, well-known religious Christian men who wrote good books, one day say, I don't believe in God, I don't believe Jesus, all false. Then I come to understand one thing when Christ said, many shall say to me in that day, Lord, Lord. There will be many who will call themselves Christian and Jesus is my Lord. The conclusion is this. There are many who are taking Christianity as a religion. That is all. I found it difficult to believe in the past until I read all these testimonies. And my conclusion is this. If a Christian does not care, really seriously, I don't care, and I'm going to continue to live like that, I'm going to openly live like that, and when other Christians live like that with me and be part of my group, I have no problem. There are Christians, I'll put it this way, Christianity can be, now I realize Christianity can be just like another religion. Like a person believes in Buddhism. Your parents who believe in Buddhism? You have, right? Are they very staunch Buddhists? We call them staunch Buddhists, right? They won't let you be Christian, right? They won't let you be baptized, right? They really believe in offering food to idols. They really believe the dead can get the money that you burn, right? They really believe that. And they don't want you to be Christian. Just because you say, I believe in Christianity, I don't want Buddhism, I don't want Hinduism, it does not make you a believer. Christianity is just a religion to you. Just like to them, Buddhism is so real, Christianity is so real to you. But you will pick and choose. You will say, I don't care. Really, this provoking, this be godly, come to church, grow spiritually. And then I began to understand why some people leave church. Because over time, they say, wow, so strict Christian living, so strict. So some have left and openly, they go around telling people in other churches, oh, we don't go to church anymore, especially BPCWA, because it's very strict. This cannot, that cannot, drinking cannot, so many things cannot. Do yoga also cannot. Then they say, oh, we're not going there anymore. Then I realize there are people who choose temples also, you know? There are people who choose temples. I have relatives who like to go to certain temples because this temple is very good. But then when the monk changed, then suddenly this temple is not very good anymore. Either this temple asks too much, desires too much, or too serious, then they change temple, you know? Then I realized, Christians, if you say, I don't care, you better check. Paul says here, these people say, I don't care. This is what I believe. I'm continuing to believe in this other gospel. I'm going to continue to live this way. After that, he dealt with that. If we sin willfully after the knowledge. If you can sin willfully, if you can be told again and again and you really don't care, it may be just a religion to you. And one day you're just looking for another temple to go to after this message. But really, God says, we have so much positive influence that we can bring to people's life. This passage is spoken after Paul addressed salvation. After salvation, God says, be a positive influence. Be that. Now you have to think before you speak, act, choose, promote, post things. Consider first. Ask yourself, what am I provoking? What am I provoking? Think before you do those things. Our aim is to provoke positive outcomes. That is our aim. Not to promote ourselves, our lifestyle, to tell people how successful I can be. Now, someone has chose to go to another church. I tried to text the person many times, the person won't respond. And I've been hearing information here and there. I do not know how true, but if it is true, it is very sad. Because the person says something like, in this church, you cannot do business certain way. You cannot live certain lifestyle. So in this church, it's like that. And chose to go to another church. Means there are people who look for another temple. A temple that suits their lifestyle. Not a temple where I will consider, I will stir. I will see this is wrong in my life from the Word of God. I need to be stirred also. And I need to stir other by my life, by my choices. That is the Christian one anothering walk. The one anothering in the Bible is all over the place. We are our brother's keepers. The second thing, and the final thing, we are supposed to be examples. We are supposed to deliberately be examples. You have where do we get that? Now, let's please turn to 2 Thessalonians. 2 Thessalonians, please, quickly. I spent too much time on the first part. 2 Thessalonians chapter 3. 2 Thessalonians chapter 3. Verse 7 to 9. Okay, let's read together, 7 to 9. For yourselves know how ye ought to follow us, for we behaved not ourselves disorderly among you, neither did we eat any man's bread for naught, but wrought with labor and travailed night and day, that we might not be chargeable to any of you, not because we have not power, but to make ourselves an example unto you to follow us. Look up here. Paul says, I am very conscious of what you see and what you know of me. I am very conscious of it, and I deliberately live in a certain way to make sure that I am an example for you to follow. Now please turn to Philippians chapter 3. Philippians chapter 3. Verse 17 to 18. Reading. Brethren, be followers together of me, and mark them which walk so as ye have us for an example. For many walk, of whom I have told you often, and now tell you even weeping, that they are the enemies of the cross of Christ. Please know this. Listen to the word of God carefully. He said, brethren, be followers together of me. So he said, I am very conscious. I live a life that you can follow. Christians, we must be able to say that. If you have a family, how you live in your family, what you do, how you bring up your child, you are saying, watch me. I'm doing it out of love to God, not because I want people to follow me. All right? Paul said, follow me because I follow Christ. Because I follow Christ. You and I are called when you have a child. You can't have a child, I disappear. I seem to do nothing. I'm not saying having a child is easy, but you cannot just disappear from church. That is what you're now telling people. This is the example. Follow me. As my child grow up, what I do, what I teach. Do I discipline? Do I not discipline? You are being an example. Singles, working person, the same. You are being an example. We are called to be an example. Now, be followers together of me and mark them. You know what is mark them? Mark them means single them out, watch them, and basically put a mark on them and say, this is the person I watch. I'm very conscious. I consider them. Like that word consider. Mark them. Mark who are these them? Mark them which walk so also. There, in other words, Paul said, I am not the only Christian who is very careful, who is trying to stir others to love God and to be godly. No, in your church, mark those that walk so. There are also those that are like me. We are supposed to be that. And now this is the other part for Christians who you are struggling. You are trying to grow. You are trying to correct your life. This is the instruction. These people, they try to live a certain life. You have a child, you have a family, you have struggles as a single, as a working person. God says there are Christians, there are good examples. Mark them. For what? God tell you, don't ignore them. Watch them, watch their life, and follow their life. Be stirred by their life. God show you He helped them. He can. They can. You can too. So God wants you to mark people. You can't mark people if you don't come to church. You can't mark people if you don't know people. You don't talk to them. God says you interact. You watch those families. You watch those singles. You watch that working person. You watch them and follow them because they follow Christ. So you must mark people. You must watch. You cannot say it's too difficult. But also verse 18, for many walk, of whom I have told you often, and now I tell you weeping. They are the enemies of the cross of Christ. There are those that are opposite. They stir others to negative things, to deny Christ, to deny many things. False teachings as well as false living. Wrong living. Paul said, I cry when I see that. I cry because when I see those people, and I know the moment you follow them, you will not be what God saved you to be. I will see you backslide. I will see you fall into diverse sins. Paul said, whenever I see that, my heart breaks. I can understand that, a small part of that as a pastor. When I see certain groups, instead of stirring others to love, they stir others to sin. My heart weeps. I worry. I have long conversations with session. How to deal with it, how to help. Because these are enemies of the cross of Christ. They will tell them, don't bear the cross of Christ. This, deny your cross, deny yourself, take up the cross. This, forget about this kind of life. This is not the gospel. They preach another gospel. Godly living. Forget about this. Just live for us. They are strict Christians, just let them be. God says they are the enemies of Christ. Enemies of the cross. No cross in the Christian life. Just joy. That's all. So Paul said for those, there are those that are like that. Don't be like that. Be an example. Now last one. Let's turn to Philippians chapter 4. The last one. Finishing. Philippians chapter 4. Alright. We all know this very well. Now verse 9 reading together. Those things which ye have both learned and received and heard and seen in me, do, and the God of peace shall be with you. That is what Paul says. I live to be an example. Christians, live to be an example. Don't just talk. Now, if you choose certain choices as a family, as a single, as a person, please know your child is learning. The church does not benefit in you obeying God. But your child is learning. Your child is watching. You live in a certain way, your spouse is learning. You come to church, God wants us to observe. You know the weaknesses of some. Encourage them, not stir them to live wrongly. We ourselves are called to be an example. From today onwards, we must be an example. We are called to that. Now, one of the things that your group leaders were concerned about is really this carelessness, this careless attitude. This, I live my own life. Well, you don't have to follow me, but don't expect me to change. There's no such thing. We are called to change others by our own change. And your group leaders are also concerned that, that's the same concern as mine, many do not come because you don't understand. And we hope after this you understand. Please look at Hebrews 10 and then we close. I hope you understand. Hebrews 10. Look at verse 24. Let us consider one another. It is as much as for you to be careful of others, don't stumble them. You also consider those that are walking right. Follow them. Provoke to love. The desire is that you love God. Nothing to do with numbers in church. Is that you love God and you walk and do godly works. But you can only do that, verse 25. You can only have that. You can only stir others and be stirred if you don't ignore, forsake, leave behind the churching of yourselves together. And there were some that are. Some of them are like that. But instead, come alongside, encourage, stir, admonish. Live that example is the best example of exhorting. Speech, saka, speech, action, choices, attitude. That is how you stir. Let us pray. Now, someone asked, what is the difference between psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs?
有人说诗章、颂词、灵歌有什么不同？
Someone also asked, can we just have instrumental music?
有人说我们只要乐器的音乐就好。
Can we worship God with instrumental music?
我们单单用乐器的音乐来敬拜神就好，可以吗？